had your dream job. You were an FBI special agent. You were working mostly on child pornography cases, but then you were reassigned, to move on to the January 6th investigations. And I just want to read something from your book here from the summary. It says that you soon uncovered efforts by the FBI to manipulate statistics and exaggerate the nationwide threat of domestic terrorism. So let's just start from the beginning. What exactly did you see happening with these January 6th investigations? And when was that moment for you when you said, this isn't sitting right with me, I need to speak up and say something?
My background in the FBI was actually in violent crimes on Indian reservations for the first 7 years. So that's relevant to what happened to me with the January 6th cases, because on Indian country reservation cases, there's a lot of volume, and you're investigating a lot of cases start to finish. I had opened about 200 cases in 7 years, so I was very familiar with the FBI's DIOG, the Domestic Investigation Operations Guide, which is essentially the rule book for how to carry an investigation forward. So I had that background, and when I was rolled from the child pornography investigations into national security and had the opportunity to look at these January 6th cases, many of which are not terrorism investigations, they're actually criminal. And I had that background and that sort of work tempo where you're always trying to get this one done because the next one's coming behind it, and that's very atypical in national security. Those cases are very slow and they're dragged out, so it was inconsistent with my experience, and I just had that sort of bias, I guess, coming in, and I looked into the January 6th cases that we already had in my office and saw right away that the way that the case management and indexing processes that are being specifically given to these cases is inconsistent with the DIOG. And raise that concern with my colleagues, and the response that I got from them was disturbing to me, to the point where I got really suspicious about what's been going on from the origin, because I came in 9-10 months post January 6th. I didn't have any exposure to it, so essentially the crux of my revelation is January 6th happens. It should be one case driven from Washington field office with however many subjects you want to involve in that case. And if those people live outside of Washington and Washington needs assistance, they need certain investigative actions performed, they would cut leads to the field for us to do anything. And it could be from gathering evidence, doing an interview, making an arrest. That's the way things typically go. But with January 6th, the decision was made that instead of opening up one case, they were going to open up a separate case for every single person who was considered a subject. And instead of running them from Washington, D.C., they were going to disseminate those cases to the field for where the person lived. So I live in Daytona. So if somebody was a subject for January 6th, they lived in Daytona, it would be run from the Daytona office. That's okay. That's atypical, but it is still allowable. The problem is, once that decision is made, the Daytona office is supposed to be in charge of the case. And if my name is the case manager, I'm supposed to be making all the investigative decisions that are relevant for the case. That was not happening with January 6th. Instead, we were answering to a task force in Washington, D.C., which was directing us what to do. Now, it's sort of, if it's achieving the same thing that, as opposed to opening a case in Washington, opening it in Daytona, what's really the difference? Why is that important? And I asked, why are we doing it? And was told that it was to get buy-in from the field. And that was a term that was used on one of these coordination calls very early on in the process. After January 6th happened, there were all these big, huge telephone calls that were going on nationwide, how they're going to bring things forward. And the buy-in phrase, it could mean one of two things. One is, does Washington think that its personnel are not going to do a good job if their name is not on the piece of paper? And that's pretty macabre view of your workforce, and I don't think that's true. So then it's the second thing that's logical, and that would be that we're going to spread these around to the field. We're going to have thousands of cases, and we're going to allow each one of the FBI's 56 field offices around the continental U.S. to meet its metrics that it predetermines before the year starts for opening up a certain amount of domestic terrorism cases. And that will allow the bosses in the offices to hit their bonuses, which they do get compensation based on that. And secondly, we're going to be able to create this false narrative that domestic terrorism is around the country, whereas all of these cases are from one case on one day in one location. Now we give the impression that in El Paso, in Cleveland, in Sacramento, in Portland, that there's domestic terrorism on the rise, when really, in fact, those subjects are people who happen to be at the Capitol on one day.
And so you raised this to your supervisor. You said, were you surprised by this response, or what went through your head when you were told this? And then what happened after that?
Well, I really had very little to do on January 6th once I got rolled into it because the cases were sort of sitting dormant. We performed every 90 days. We have to have a file review and kind of show that the case is active and that we're doing something to bring it forward. But we were essentially waiting for Washington, D.C. to make a determination on these cases. So that in itself we're not in charge of our own case, which was disturbing to me. And then we were performing investigative activities that were unnecessary, like claiming we did surveillance. We would just drive by the guy's house because we knew who he was and where he lived, and there was nothing to be gained from it, but we were just checking the box. Ultimately, I decided I had two different instances where I was assigned to go and talk to a potential January 6th subject, and another one who was already represented and it was verified that he'd gone into the Capitol. And I had two experiences there that were very disturbing to me. The initial one was an anonymous tip where it came into Washington, D.C. from Rhode Island, no name behind it. And they said, we think that this guy was in the Capitol and you should go investigate. The task force in D.C. did an evaluation of the gentleman's cell phone, came up negative, did an evaluation of his social media, negative, did a facial recognition summary of his, see if his pictures matched the surveillance footage, nothing. And I was told, you still need to go talk to him, even though bringing a prosecution forward would be almost impossible. So I said, okay, I guess I got to. And they said, if you don't, then they're just going to keep telling you have to do it. So again, not in charge of our own decisions. I drove to this gentleman's residence, knocked on his door, and said, hey, I'm here from the FBI. We're looking at January 6th. We're at the Capitol that day. And he said, no, that was the day of my son's funeral. So I had to make that man relive potentially the worst day of his life just to check the box. So that was experience number one. Experience number two was there was a gentleman who went to President Trump's speech, walked over to the Capitol, and then got Capitol police officers' permission to go in. And he was a dual citizen. He'd never been to the Capitol before. He said that he was kind of a nerd. He wanted to go in and essentially look at the architecture inside the Capitol. He said he went in and he was on video. He hadn't committed any, violent acts, walked around and then left. Now, this was a guy who he was represented by an attorney. So he was, out of pocket for that. He told us he had lost his job. He was a physician and his license was in jeopardy. And he asked at the end, where do I stand with this? And we couldn't tell him if he was going to get charged because we weren't really in control of our own case. And it really became apparent to me that the process that the FBI is using with these January 6 cases, in many cases, is in itself a punishment. Because even if that gentleman is not charged with the crime, his livelihood is ruined. He is out of pocket for an attorney, which is very expensive. And he just sits sort of in this state of psychological limbo where he's having to sit in this room and talk to FBI agents, which is very stressful. And we're in fact punishing him when we might not actually pursue charges. And that's not the job of the FBI. We're not supposed to be the executioner. We're the investigator. And so I had those two experiences, and I just resigned myself to the belief that, in light of us violating these rules, that could potentially be a civil rights violation. At the very least, it's something that we would have to disclose at trial. And if we don't, we're lying. And if we do disclose it at trial, that's grounds to lose. And I want to win if it's a righteous investigation. So you kind of put us in a position where we either violate their rights and lie, or violate their rights and expose it, and then we lose a righteous case where we don't, because if somebody commits a crime and they deserve to be convicted and sent to jail, that's on us to prove that case, and we need to do our job there. And then you combine that with the unnecessary heavy-handed investigative tactics, where that gentleman who I talked to, with his lawyer and losing his job, or individuals who had been in communication with the FBI who said, hey, look, if you charge me with a crime, just call me up, I'll surrender. And instead, decisions were being made that we're going to either use large-scale arrest operations, potentially SWAT teams to go get these guys, when they had vocalized a willingness to cooperate with us, which, in my background, I had 5 years of SWAT experience. It didn't seem like a good use. It seemed like actually a safety hazard to that individual, to my colleagues, to the public at large, which is another whistleblower concern if there's an unnecessary risk to public safety. So I brought those concerns forward when the word came down that my office was going to be participating in an arrest operation in August of 2022. The prior week is when I made my initial disclosure to my frontline supervisor.
But since then, they took your gun, they took your badge, suspended you. So where do we stand now in the whole grand scheme of your story here? Where are we today?
They suspended my security clearance. The FBI is essentially weaponizing the security clearance revocation process. So as opposed to doing a personnel investigation into my conduct, they found the thinnest way that they could potentially suspend my security clearance, because you can't work as an FBI agent without a security clearance. So I found that, and they said that I improperly accessed the employee handbook was the rationale for that. As well as my refusal to participate in a lawful arrest, which I didn't actually refuse. I told them I didn't want to, and they told me to stay home, and they docked me a day's pay. So I essentially adhered to their directive. But I was walked out on September 19th, 2022, and I was left in limbo for 150 days of unpaid suspension. They gave me paperwork to seek outside employment, which I filled out, submitted, and was rejected. It's a ploy to lean on you financially and hope that you just go away. And they also denied me my training records, which there's a law on the books, a Privacy Act. You're entitled to get your training records, and I was still technically an FBI employee. I sought my training, my firearms records. I needed those to seek outside employment, and then they've been loath to give those to me. So that's been one sort of violation of another on their part. And eventually it all culminated last week when I testified at the select committee. I did a transcribed interview, which is essentially a deposition. And going into that, made the decision that I was going to resign from the FBI and accept the position that they had initially rejected as a senior fellow with the Center for Renewing America.
So talk to me a bit about that now. What is your work going to look like with the Center for Renewing America? What is your role there?
Well, they've brought me on to advise on domestic intelligence and security matters, essentially my background in the FBI. And Center for Renewing America is going to be advising as best it can this select committee on how to investigate the weaponization of government. And my expertise is the FBI. I know a lot of where the bodies are buried on some of these issues from personal experience, as well as with the network that I've been able to cultivate over the last 5 months, and talking to people that are still in positions with the FBI and see what's going on a daily basis.
You also have your book coming out, which I do want to get to right now. For people who have been following your story, can they expect anything new in this? And talk to me a bit about why you decided to put your whole story into a memoir.
Well, writing a book, for one, to me has always been something that I wanted to do just as a personal goal. I have a background in law enforcement before the FBI. And when you work as a cop, there's just this, somebody should write a book about this, everybody's always saying, oh, we should just collect all of our stories. And because one of the best things about cops is we can all tell stories. We can all talk, as evidence with me, you today. And I had I felt good background going into making my whistleblower disclosure that sort of set me up in this position that I never saw myself in. And I wanted to tell some of the lessons that I learned as a police officer and as an FBI agent. And I wanted to highlight some of the great work that does go on in the FBI that has this reputation that has now become so tarnished with a large swath of the American population. And then I wanted to give the details of what my concerns were, because One, I think they've been misrepresented to a lot of people. And the other thing is people have a lot going on. We have a limited bandwidth, and that's one of the largest lessons that I've learned over the last 5 months since I was suspended. And even talking to people like yourself in the media, we just have this assumption that, well, they work in the news, so they know all the news. And that's just not true. You folks are concentrated on the story that's in front of you, just like I was concentrated on the case that was in front of me. I didn't know anything about January 6th until I got assigned to it. And I just am hoping that I can spread this information to as many people as possible who will give it an honest read. Because at its core, the FBI to me should be about preserving law and order. And if it is manipulating statistics in a fashion that makes half the country look like terrorists, then it is contributing to this environment where the boiling pot is just continuing to boil and boil and boil. The First Amendment in this country allows anybody to sit across the table from anybody else and have a constructive dialogue, and they can disagree or agree on any subject that they want. However, you cannot have that conversation if one person feels that the other person is a terrorist with a bomb strapped to their chest. And the FBI is creating that illusion for half the country and shutting the Overton window to them to participate in the American experience of having political dialogue.
Since you've shared your story, you've been on multiple media outlets. The word's gotten out there. People know who you are, what your experiences have been, and you've been called a hero. You've also been called a villain. I want to hear from you exactly what has your experience been? What has the reaction been to you? And how has your life changed since coming out about this?
I keep saying that I've lived a few years over the last few months. I never sought this path for myself. I had my dream job, as we said before. What I wanted to do was put criminals in jail and protect good people from bad people. I joined the FBI to do the job of an FBI agent. Not to retire from the FBI. That was not really on my radar. And the decision I made was tied to the oath that I took. I swore the oath to protect the Constitution, to protect my countrymen. And I truly believe that raising the flag is consistent with my oath of office. It's consistent with the FBI training where they take us to the Holocaust Memorial Museum and the MLK Memorial Museum monument. And we talk about how those things can only happen if nobody raises their hand and says, what we're doing is wrong. Are we the bad guys? And so I felt I was consistent with my oath and with my training. And I won't have the opportunity to retire as an agent, but it's something that I can live with and know that I kept the fight. My oath is never going to resign. It was never going to retire. I'm going to have that, on my heart forever. And it's something that I never sought this out, but I'm hoping that I can make the difference. And really, the experience to me that is the most troubling is the treatment that I got from the FBI is similar to what I got at my deposition last week from the minority side, and that is, you might think I'm a hack, you might think I'm a grifter, you might think I'm a patriot. Whatever you think doesn't matter about me. The important thing to do is to look at my complaint and determine the veracity of that. And if it's correct and my concerns are legitimate, then we need to address it, because that's the job of the FBI and the government, to serve the American people. If they're not accurate and they're illegitimate, then we can prove that they're wrong and we can just move on. And that's what the Republican majority seems to be doing and interested in doing. The Democratic minority and the FBI seem to just be interested in attacking the messenger. And the fact that they won't address the accuracy or legitimacy of my complaint, to me, shows that they think that it's real and legitimate, and they just are afraid to confront it. I think if there's anything that folks should know, is that the whistleblowers that have come forward, I'm one of many, and there's dozens that have gone to Congressman Jordan's office. And a lot of these people are not in a position that I'm in, where I can speak out and I'm comfortable speaking out. They exist sort of in this anonymous shadow, and they have been wronged to the extent that is far worse than even my own predicament, which is in itself pretty bad. I was left without a paycheck. My wife lost her job under suspicious circumstances. So that was definitely a hardship for us, but we have a great support network, and we are trying to provide aid to those that aren't in that position. So I've had a lot of people reach out and say, hey, how can I help? They don't need to worry about Steve Friend. They can, if it's on their heart to really help I would encourage them to one, look at Empower Oversight, which is a 501c3 group that provides legal assistance to whistleblowers, and they've certainly helped me quite a bit. And secondly, there's a Give Send Go. It's Give Send Go / Kyle Seraphin. That money does not go to Kyle. It does not go to me. It goes to another whistleblower who was put in a significant financial hardship after he was wrongly accused of being a whistleblower to the media, which was erroneous, and the FBI has left him high and dry. And finally, just an appeal to my elected officials. I know that this is a difficult task of the select committee. The temptation is going to be to follow the template of the January 6th committee. The problem with that is that was an appeal to emotion only, because the facts weren't on their side. In this case, you have the facts on your side. You need to have whistleblowers come forward and provide firsthand anecdotal evidence to the American people, and let them know what is going on and has transpired over the last few years. And that will provide you with the ammunition you need in the upcoming budget debate.